Hi, I'm Amy.
And I'm Kirsty.
And this is our podcast covering the highs, lows and realities of parenting a child with neurodiversity.
Each week we'll be sharing updates from our lives and hearing from a variety of guests about their advice and experiences.
This is Love Needs No Words. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Love Needs No Words. We are joined by Sarah Pearson, a mum very new to this journey. Her daughter Florence, or Flo for short, is 3.5 and was developing neurotypically until around 3 when there was a huge regression. She's come on to share her story. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So you are, as I've said, relatively new to this world. As many of our listeners are as well. It's quite an unusual story in that Flo regressed a lot later than many parents may recognise the sign. So what would you say stood out for you and led you to believe that maybe she might be having a regression?
I noticed from Flo being really quite small, I thought she was having absent seizures. And this idea got poo-pooed quite quickly because I was really struggling with quite severe postnatal anxiety. And I think everybody around me, firstly, didn't catch any of these episodes, but also was very aware that I was really unwell. And my anxiety centered around Flo's health. I was like obsessed with it. I'd had a really, really, really awful and very traumatic pregnancy journey to get her earthside, which triggered the anxiety, and a very traumatic birth. So I think a lot of people were sort of trying to reassure me at that period. And then I just was doing more and more reading on absent seizures and basically decided to try and capture some on video because they do look like daydreaming. And I think a lot of people would never be able to tell the difference, to be honest, but I could. And I did manage to capture one where, you know, I was clicking in Florence's face, I was waving in her face, I was calling her name, and she just was completely not there. And for really quite a long time, like long enough for me to have clicked her in the car seat, noticed it was happening, got my phone out, opened the camera app, scrolled to video, started recording, and then did some prompts. From that point on, it's actually been very amazing because they sent us to neurology and we were seen very quickly. And then we were treated as a child would be for absent seizures. So we had epilepsy nurses, her heart was checked, and then her brain was checked. And that was kind of before the regression. And then what happened was we were having an extension in our home, very first world problem, I know, but we had to move out because it was not safe to live here. And we moved in with my mum and dad. And that was when everything started to go sideways, to be honest. She started stimming, which was completely new or not been noticed before. And her speech completely stopped developing. And in fact, she regressed. She sort of stopped speaking. And the age appropriate two-way conversation that we've been having with her up until that point completely stopped. She went very in on herself. And there were a few other things as well, like her toileting regressed slightly. But that actually, I think, was probably more just I hate the word trauma in scenarios like this, but kind of like the trauma of moving. She didn't understand. She just suddenly was living with her grandparents and uncle.
A new environment.
And in a new environment. And she was there all the time because they do all of our childcare up to that point because she hadn't started preschool. But I think living there 24/7, but the main thing of Jules and I still trying to maintain our work commitments as normal, but living further away from where we both work. You know, it's like we were out for really long hours and it was all very bizarre. So that was kind of how it all started, really. It was the stimming first, then the speech and the toileting, all at kind of the same time then. And then on top of that, we started her at her preschool. And again, that was an issue in the sense that you could put a lot of it down to, oh, there's so much change, you know, it's quite normal. Everything you Google, it's like, oh no. And I just remember doing a test online on like one of the many autism websites where you can do like a little test, like, does your child do this? Yes or no, maybe, you know, and they give you a score. And Flo came out as number 1 of like 10, say with me. So like, no, your child does not have autism. Then we moved back into our home. And to be honest, it got even worse. And we had a summer where we kind of had lost her, really, to be honest. It sounds quite dramatic, but that's how it felt at the time, especially with her speech and her eye contact as well, which had been completely there, you know. So, yeah, it was a bit of a shock.
How did that make you feel? Because I think for many of our listeners, it's a lot earlier that the regression happens. So to kind of get that far, how did that feel for both of you?
Well, obviously it's extremely shocking and worrying, because I think because of the absent seizure thing, I couldn't get away from the thought of like, has she had a big convulsion that has not been witnessed and it's damaged her brain? So that was like the first thing that I thought of. But then I was like, well, I don't think so, because we've had quite a few appointments with the neurology team at this point. It wasn't just like we saw the epilepsy nurse once, we filled out a questionnaire and that was it. They were really thorough, in my opinion. So and then I was like, oh, actually these conditions go hand in hand. And I've always thought of myself as quite neurospicy. I'm dyslexic, and the more reading I do, clearly I am also autistic. So I think the first thing was like shock and worry, but I think the overwhelming thing is just grief, full on grief, which I know has been brought up in the podcast previously. And just utter panic for her future, to be honest, because we had a regression rather than Florence sort of developing in her own way, in her own time. Like, she lost those skills. So then it's like the constant anxiety now for me is, when will the next regression be, and what will that steal from her? And she might never have another one. She probably will have another one. I don't know. But yeah, the grief is the main thing, I think. I'm just grieving for the future that I had envisaged for myself the minute that I saw that little cross on that first pregnancy test. You know, she was so wanted, and it was so hard to get her earthside with that horrible pregnancy, that it just felt like another blow. You know, it was just like another hurdle that we now have to deal with. And I feel like elements have been stolen from us, to be honest, which doesn't sound very nice to say, and feels horrible to admit as well, to be honest.
There'll be a lot of people listening, and I think Amy and I will quite openly admit as well that we have been through this journey as well. And I remember Amy, right at the very beginning, when I first found out about Max, shared with me a poem. I think it's called Welcome to Holland. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but it beautifully sums up. It's beautifully worded, and it's basically about kind of believing that you were on this journey, you were going to Italy, and you were ready for Italy, you'd prepared for Italy, and then they told you you're going to Holland, and you think, I wasn't prepared for Holland, and I don't know how to speak the language, and all of these different feelings that go through. And I think it's not just people, who have children with autism or ADHD or any of the neurodiversities. It's so much broader, isn't it? Because you have this feeling of what you believe your child, what you envisage actually your future to look like as a family, and actually it's a harsh reality when you have to look in the mirror and think, actually that might not be what it looks like for us.
Absolutely. I feel that there's like a lot of sort of panic as well at the moment of like, what will her future look like? We'll be heading into reception year in the next academic year, which means that at the time of this filming, we've literally just done our sort of school selections. So it's like it's just realizing that everything's just going to be a little bit more challenging.
We always talk about that crystal ball, don't we? That you just wish you could even just look 6 months or a year into the future, and like, she's at school and she's happy and she hasn't regressed again and her speech is slowly coming back, just so you don't have to have this worry, because that is, I just feel it like a constant state of worry. And I've spoken about in the last few weeks Alex saying a few words, but then you don't want to get too excited, because then you might not hear those words again, or that might be it for a few more months. So you want to get excited, but inside you're just having to stay at this kind of like mellow level, because you just don't know what the next corner brings.
What's really interesting though is when we talk about that crystal ball, every single person that I've spoken to who's ever like reflected on it or mentioned it, or I've spoken to about it, every single person says, I just want to be able to look forward and know they're happy. None of us are saying I want them to be rich, or I want them to be powerful, or I just want them to be happy. That's all you want for them.
Exactly. I always said from the beginning of this journey to Jules, my husband, I was like, I just want 2 things for her. I want her to be able to live independently, because obviously that underlying, that means she's been able to pick up a lot of skills and can do that safely, and also to form relationships that she wants to. Because for me, they're the kind of 2 things that would form that happiness, you know, that like
Yes.
no isolation, and, you know, having friendships or even relationships with other people. Yeah, I just that's kind of all I want, really.
I can really relate to a lot of what you've said, actually, Sarah. But one of the first things that I said when we found out that Max may have autism was speaking to a friend of mine and just really being on the edge of tears and just saying, I just don't want him to be lonely.
Yeah.
I just don't want him to be lonely. And that was my biggest fear at first. That was my biggest concern. Probably an element of not really understanding autism all that well at that point as well, and having to go on the journey. But yeah, that was my one of my initial reactions. Yeah.
Has she changed much, would you say? So like, is she quite an affectionate child? That's not gone.
Oh my God, she is so cuddly wuddly. She is
Ah, see,
the
that's
most
nice.
cuddly kid I think I've ever witnessed. And like, but also one of those things of like, with the knowledge I have now looking back, was that also a sign? Because she wouldn't always, she's like my moon, like she's always under my feet, and she needs cuddles and reassurance. And I'm now realizing that that is probably another form of stimming for Florence, is that she needs that pressure. She's a sensory seeker. She likes to crawl all over me. She likes to play with my hair, like, you know, things that are a little bit more classic. But then if you scratch away at the surface, you know, like she always has to be touching me. Like her toe will be on my foot at all times, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that hasn't gone. Yeah, no, she's incredibly affectionate, which is lovely. There's a few things that are slowly creeping back, I'd say, from the regression. Like she in the regression basically then just relied on echolalia.
Sure.
So she would just use those phrases and repeat and repeat and repeat. And we're trying really hard to follow some advice we've been given by a private speech and language therapist, of trying not to ask questions or demand on her, which actually is very, very difficult.
Yes.
Yeah. Very, very hard not to ask your preschooler questions. But anyway, yeah, so I'm hopeful that the speech will slowly develop. I had like a really cute, I can't remember what it is now, which is really annoying, but we had like a really cute little 5-word sentence the other day, and my mum was there and she was like, hang on a minute, that's 5 words that you said, folks. Good girl, that was really clever of you to say that. And it was just, yeah, and she's got like a little sense of humor, and yeah, she's not completely gone. She's definitely there. It's just that it's almost like the barrier went up and we're kind of knocking that barrier down.
As we all know, there's a bit of a process with this journey. So accepting your child has got additional needs and processing that. And then the amount of admin that comes next with getting them diagnosed, experts involved and such like. So where are you in the process and how have you found it so far?
Well, I mean, I think we can all agree that it's the one thing that's absolutely ridiculously overwhelming. And it kind of has already made me quite angry at how confusing things are. It's almost like I really wish that a bit like a social service situation was there, where you had almost like a caseload worker or a health visitor that just stayed with you, held your hand and was like, right, we've got this letter through now, let's read it together. You know, I'm dyslexic. Like sometimes I don't understand, or like the way that they word things is quite hard for me to process. It takes me a lot longer than like the average Joe to you know, read or understand things. It's just very difficult for me. But also I just think the whole process is very long-winded, and aside from the fact that it's clearly an arena of expertise that is so underfunded that we are having to wait for these years and years and years. So yeah, but the preschool have been like incredible, and I'm already absolutely terrified of her moving on from there.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how lucky or what our luck has been to land the little village preschool being full of like the most incredible women that are just so dedicated to the kids that they look after, and us as well. Like, oh my God, they hold my hand so well. So yeah, so the process. So back when the regression was happening, sort of in full swing, kind of the last time of the year, the academic year, because she'd started preschool, and then the summer holidays. At the end of the summer holidays, my husband and I fired off an email to the preschool, just being like, over the summer holidays and those last few weeks of term, we've noticed this, 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 and this. Do you concur? And they replied immediately and were like, we don't normally label things at this age until a child is very settled, which I understand, because Flo wasn't really very settled. And a few of the things could be a parallel to a child that was adjusting to a new environment. But they were amazing, and they were like, because you have come to us with these concerns, we're going to action on them straight away rather than wait this indefinite amount of time, which is basically exactly what happened. So we created with them like a SEN plan. Before she'd even gone back to school, the manager basically then emailed the local authorities and were like, we have this child in our care that we'd like to put on the pathway for an autism diagnosis. And then a few things happened very quickly. Like we had a health visitor visit twice to talk about nutrition and sleep hygiene. And then we went on an autism awareness course, and then that's been it, basically. Just before Christmas, so about a month ago at the point of recording this, again, the preschool have taken the lead to start the process of an EHCP. And we've done our parent element of that already. We've tried to be right on that, because we know, again, that I think the turnaround's supposed to be 20 weeks, but again, they're not doing it in 20 weeks at all, are they? So, you know, but I'm trying not to panic about that. I'm trying to remember that Flo will be going into reception. And so really, if you think about it, that's still very play-based. Yeah. So in my head, we've basically got an academic and a half years worth of time to get that EHCP really locked down. And also to make any adjustments to where she might be being schooled if we need to, which is quite a U-turn in my mind, because I've been really, really like sleepless nighting about that, really. Still need to work on my own sleep hygiene.
Yes, but it's very hard when you're carrying that kind of, it's just a lot to process and to actually just action as well.
Yeah, and it's like trying to do all of that actioning alongside being present and looking after her when I have the precious time I am with her.
Yeah.
Trying to maintain friendships for her, friendships for me, trying to maintain a happy and supportive marriage, trying to sustain my family feeling supported, cared for, seen and heard, and also just having time on my own and seeing friends and stuff as well. You know, it's like, where is there time for, and that's hard enough for any mum. So then adding into the mix this added mental load, I've found it a very hard adjustment to somebody that was struggling anyway. You know, I have chronic fatigue syndrome and I'm very high functioning with it, luckily, but it is something that I do have to factor into my everyday existence. You know, where is my energy being spent today? Okay, well, I've got 2 forms to fill out and I need to be as thorough as possible. But also the minute I open my laptop, Flo's pressing the button. So I can't do it while she's around. But I don't finish work until 8:45 p.m. and then I need to be in bed by 9:30. So when's that going to happen? You know, it's just that spiral, isn't it?
I know, and you put a lot of pressure on yourself to do these things well as well, because you understand the enormity of them and the value that they can bring in your child's life.
Exactly.
It's Sarah, you're doing a great job.
Yeah, you're doing amazing.
To have processed all of this, not just the emotional side of it, but also all of the admin as well. She's still so young, and it was obviously such a shock for you as well.
Yeah, it was. It's an interesting one though, because it was, but it also is something that I can remember saying to Jules when she was young. I just have a feeling that Flo might be autistic, and him being like, there are no reasons for us to think that. Like she is developing completely on track, and it just was like this weird little buzzy back of brain thing.
Mum instinct.
I mean, maybe, and I know that there's traits in my family, so I think that was probably a seed sown. You know,
I wonder how many of our listeners can relate to that. I mean, I definitely had an instinct that there was some neurodiversity going on. I thought Max had ADHD from a very, very, very young age. What did you think, Amy?
I think for me, I hadn't come across it. I didn't even know what autism was. So for me, this was really like, I felt like my world had come crashing down because I had to learn everything and very, very quickly. But I definitely for a long time was using COVID as an excuse. So I was saying, oh, well, he's not been socializing, so there's no wonder he's doing this, no wonder he's doing that. And it was actually my mum, who I think she might have 9 grandchildren. I hope I've got that right. And she knew at 10 months, she said, he's not showing me any eye contact. And I remember her being like, Alex, shouting at him. And I was like, Mum, stop shouting at him. She's like, he's not looking at me. I'm shouting and he's not looking at me. And I remember then I burst into tears and I was just like, something's not right, is it? And she was like, it's all right. It's okay. And I was like, but it isn't okay. Like, why is this happening to me? Why me? Like, waited so long. I wanted this baby with everything. And I think it was just so hard to process it and then go away and like basically feel like you've got to learn everything about autism very, very quickly to get everything in place for them as early as possible. So yeah, I think for me, it was very much I'm going to have to accept this and quickly and try and get some help in any way I can to kind of help him, because I had absolutely no idea about it. So yeah, it was tough. It is really tough for all of us, because whether you are aware of it or not, you still have to process that your child is neurodiverse, and that's never easy.
Yeah.
You've spoken to us briefly about this, but your mum's been amazing, hasn't she? Because she's got quite a lot of Sen experience.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. We're incredibly lucky. And in fact, you just telling the story about you and your mum in that moment. My mum and I have a very similar experience. I don't even know if Sheila clocked it, but for me, it was the moment where we were living with them at the time. And Florence had started stimming, but literally a few days before. And at that point, it was few and far between. So you could just chalk it up as just before her third birthday, probably. A 3-year-old, let's say, jumping up and down out of excitement. But there was one moment where she'd been doing it almost constantly rather all day. And my mum and I literally were sat on 2 different sofas, and we just clocked eyes with each other. And in that female way where you could say a million words with just one look.
Yeah.
And there was this like, I just knew in that moment that she was confirming what I already had thought in my heart and my tummy, that feeling of like something's here. And yeah, I would say that the tides then turned at that moment. There was quite a lot of shifting then after that day. For me personally, I think for my husband it took a little bit longer, and rightly so, to be honest. Yeah.
So your mum, is she a Senko, or she worked with children with additional needs?
So she's worked with children the whole of her kind of career since I can remember. Sorry, Mum, if there's stuff I've forgotten, but she actually worked in a special needs school when I was sort of primary age myself. And then she worked in a mainstream school with the children that needed one-to-one support. She still has her Twinkle account, and she still is up to date with all of the kind of knowledge and stuff. So we've basically lucked out, really.
That's amazing.
She sounds like an absolutely fantastic support.
It sounds like over the last few weeks you've had sort of quite a few positive steps, which must feel like a weight slowly lifting. What would you say has sort of been the biggest challenge for you both? I mean, you've had to kind of get your head around this quite quickly, but yeah, what was it? Is it her behavior, or what would you say has been the biggest challenge?
I mean, if you removed sort of like the more emotive side of the loss and the grief of things, the Christmas that we've just had was possibly the most traumatic couple of weeks since she's been earthside, because she, as I've mentioned to you both, she was having huge and violent meltdowns every single day, ranging from 1 meltdown to 4 meltdowns. I think was our worst day on Christmas Eve, ranging from 5 to 10 minutes to over an hour. And when I say violent, I mean throwing things, hurting us, kicking, punching, screaming, biting, pulling hair, trying to hurt herself, which is just the most, I mean, I don't even know what the word is to describe it, but it's just absolutely horrendous to see your child starting to bite themselves, or it's just instant failure as the parent, like, how have we even got to this point? So that was actually probably at the moment the hardest thing. It still feels very raw. Like Jules and I are still saying that we feel like we're almost on a come down from that still. And just like the walking on eggshells is a phrase I've used a lot with those few weeks. We were just constantly petrified of the next meltdown, and it just killed all joy of that Christmas period. Bearing in mind that until April time of that year that we've just had, my child was developing neurotypically. So the Christmas before that, when she was 2.5, we were like, oh my gosh, next Christmas it's going to be so exciting. We're going to be in the good old years and she's going to believe. And, oh my gosh, I can't wait. And you know, just like getting really excited about doing crafts and gluing and sticking and glitter and making cards and like, you know, like putting bows in her hair and dressing up and doing all of the things, like baking muffins that we're going to give to reindeers and like all of those things. And actually we took our Christmas tree down on Boxing Day because it had been thrown around and half the baubles had been smashed. I had a black eye. Jules had got scratches over his face, to the point where we had to make a joke out of it, that there was a moment where Jules and I went out and my parents looked after Flo for us for a few hours just to literally get some respite. We went out for lunch and I was like, people are going to think that we've been beating each other up, Jules, like that genuinely, like, you know, this isn't good. And actually, ironically, for the first time ever, because of my mum's skills and just the bond that she has with Flo anyway, my mum's very good at judging redirection. Like it's like a superpower of hers. And that was the first time that Florence had had a meltdown at my parents, to the point where my mum could not calm her down, could not do anything. And my brother, who lives with them, literally texted me being like, you need to get Flo now. And I've never legged it to the car so quick in my life. I was just like, oh my God, what's happened? My poor mum had like a bruise on her nose and it was just horrendous. But yeah, they are calming down now. Actually, we've had a period of time, I think a week now.
Do you think that was the holidays?
I was going to say, did she miss the routine of preschool? And we have gone through a journey with meltdowns with Max. I can relate to what you're talking about. He isn't violent, but it's very difficult to see. And we've had quite a bit of success actually with social stories and preparing him for events. That's been really, really helpful, and that's definitely lessened it. But for sure, they happen when he's tired and when he's out of routine. It's two big triggers.
I remember the Wednesday, the last Wednesday of school was her, well, the last week of school, the Wednesday was her last afternoon. And her preschool is next to the village primary school, which is very large. And Flo had her sort of one of very few meltdowns out of the home and was literally ripping chunks of my hair out. And I was just, and trying to run off into the road. And I had to physically restrain her whilst her ripping my hair out, just sobbing. I was just crying in front of really what felt like the entire village. And I did have a few mums come up to me and ask and offer for like, can I help you? And, you know, trying to explain in that moment that it's like, so actually my daughter's on the autistic pathway. So we assume that she's autistic, but we don't know for sure, but we kind of know. So actually you being here isn't that helpful right now. I really appreciate the gesture. You can't say that, can you? So I'm just like through tears of like, it's okay. It's just really, really overside. I'm just not coping very well. And, you know, and then a lot of people, because it went on for so long, a lot of people dispersed. And there was one lady who had maybe been delayed, I don't know, but I recognised her from the drop-off at the preschool. And she just came over and she was just like, I'm just going to sit with you whilst this happens. And she just, I know, it was amazing. Flo was still in her meltdown at that moment, but I'd sort of tried to regroup myself, and she kind of helped push her buggy and our buggy, I don't really know how she did it, to a bench, and I sat with Flo, who'd basically stripped off at this point. So then I'm getting stares anyway, because I've got a screaming toddler who's ripping my hair out in just like leggings, no shoes, no socks, and a t-shirt in December. Anyway, I'm rambling, but luckily I saw her the first kind of week back in January, and I just had to go over to her and was like, just so you know, Flo, we think Flo's autistic, and she was having one of the worst meltdowns I've ever had to deal with, and you were just the right place at the right time, and I'm so grateful for you. So yeah, just as a positive story, because I think a lot of the time we worry that people are staring, and there were a lot of stares, and it was really awful, and I had a lot of guilt and shame around that situation. But yeah, that one lady was just great.
It just takes that one person, doesn't it, to
really
just empathise with you and just be there, because it does feel a lot often that you're being judged and your parenting's being judged and your child's being judged, and
100%.
it's just a really uncomfortable feeling that you really don't need to feel in moments like that. And then afterwards you're trying to process it all with all of that baggage as well. And I think you know, often people don't mean to, but they just don't know how to help. And that lady just nailed it, didn't she, by just saying, I'll sit with you, because she can't, you know, what else could she have done but other than just be there with you to support you in whatever way you needed.
Just having that extra person sat next to you just makes you feel less alone in that moment.
Yeah.
She did, yeah. And interestingly, now that I've learned a little bit, because since then, because it was so awful, we've started working with a behavioural specialist, and I understand a lot more now. But interestingly, now I understand that she helped to regulate me and bring me kind of down,
Yes.
and stopped me crying. And okay, I need to breathe. And I think that in turn helped Florence regulate her breathing, and that made her stop crying and her nestle into me, and which meant I could rock her and give her deep pressure and, kind of just bring her down. But they're little devils though, aren't they? Because literally by the time we got home, I'm like sweating.
I
I've
bet
lost
she was all
half my hair.
smiles.
Yeah, I'm mascara down my face. I'm pretty
She's
sure
let
the
it all
top
out.
lip. And she's just having a
She's
nice
great.
lolly, lounging on the sofa, twizzling her hair, watching blooming
Back in her safe
Bluey or
place.
something. Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
all
It's
forgotten.
like
That didn't even
forward.
happen.
Yeah, I was just rocking in the corner, like ringing my husband, like, oh God, you don't need to come home, but I've just had the worst pickup ever.
Oh, Sarah, so tough. That is so unbelievably tough.
Are you starting to identify some of the behaviours that she's showing before she gets to the point of meltdown, or is she still in that phase where it happens quite quickly and it's very difficult to preempt?
It can happen very quickly, but with the help of the behavioural support that we've had, we're now calling them yellows when she's like a little bit edgy.
Mm.
And we now understand that if she is feeling a little bit edgy, that if we do certain things in that moment, mainly redirection, or for Florence, deep pressure or hiding under a blanket, then actually it can curb it. So immediately after our first appointment with the specialist that came round, we bought, like one of those little blackout tents, and we've padded it out with some blankies and things like that so she can get all snuggly. The only problem with that is that she insists I get in two, and my bum does not fit in there. I'm telling you.
You need a bigger tent.
I need a bigger tent, which is a great amusement of my husband. Every time Flo's trying to drag me in, and like my hips literally do not fit through the door, darling. And my husband's just pointing
Just
and
my
laughing.
head.
Yeah,
Just
poking in. Hello, darling. But the
you
good
can have
news
half
there
of
is
me,
that
Flo.
yes,
Just half.
exactly. But which is never enough. And then she's like, "Oh no, your toes, they're stuck. Your toes." And I'm like, "I don't contort that way, darling. But yes, okay,
We're just wearing the tent."
Literally, maybe that's what I need to do. Like make a head hole at the top and some armholes, and then it'll be fine. God, like a little traffic
Whatever
cone.
works.
Whatever works. Whatever works. So yes, to answer your question, I think that we are starting to see a little shift, mainly just in our knowledge, not really necessarily in Flow, to be honest. I think it's just that with that support, we've learning to gauge better, and we have a few sort of things up our sleeve to sort of help her. And also I've kind of let go of those moments where instead of forcing her to do something, if I see her yellowing, then I'm like, okay, do you know what? If your dinner goes cold, you don't care anyway.
Yeah.
Let's go and hide under a blanket for 20 minutes. Because dinner's not going anywhere, but this meltdown will probably mean that your dinner's going to go everywhere in 10 minutes if I don't deal with it. So yeah.
Pick your battles.
Yeah, it's reframing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, pick your battles, exactly.
But we also now realise, which is quite a new revelation, that we do think that Flo's got a PDA profile, which again is just another layer of stuff to try and navigate in those moments, and in life in general.
Can you explain what that is to those listening that don't know what that is?
I will try my hardest with my very limited knowledge, because I'm right at the very beginning and I'm trying not to overwhelm myself with it. So PDA profile, so a pathological demand avoidance. So basically she just finds it incredibly difficult to follow a request or a demand, and that might be something that we understand is very obvious. So Florence, put your coat on, or Florence, get your shoes, or more often than not, Florence, put that lolly stick in the bin, or yogurt pot in the bin, all the way through to, which I don't have too much knowledge about, but things that might be a routine that have an end result that she isn't happy with. So I was reading the other day about the bedtime routine, and that actually she knows that the end of that routine means sleep, but she doesn't like sleeping, and she definitely doesn't like sleeping alone. So it's like, actually, that's why I now understand that she can get quite yellowy, to use that phrase. She can get quite agitated sometimes, and a little bit agitated, at certain aspects of her bedtime routine, because actually she's not in control. So I'm trying to learn, along with my husband, to actually do the classic thing that we're always taught with gentle parenting, of like, give them two choices, but the end result is what you want them to do. But, you know, actually Florence's brain doesn't always work like that. Sometimes she just doesn't care. She just doesn't care. Or now I'm realizing that actually probably it's just more that it's the way that I'm asking her that just means that she's shutting down. So yeah, but that's it's, I think that's going to be something that's going to take a long time to rewire my brain.
We a couple of months ago we had a really lovely lady on the podcast whose daughter has PDA. Yeah, Steph, and she wrote a book, PDA in the Family, if I remember correctly. So and she was giving us a really great insight into PDA. It's a really fascinating profile, but she was coming at it from, you know, her daughter is a lot older now, in her teens, so she's gone through that journey of her being a young child and then growing up with it. And it was so interesting speaking to her.
Yeah, I've actually got that one saved ready to listen on the school run, because I was like, I need to really listen to that one, you know. But interestingly, like I said at the beginning of our chat, that, you know, with all this more information and knowledge that we're learning, my husband and I definitely agree that I am autistic, just very high masking. I don't think he'll mind me sharing that, say if we've ever had a disagreement, he always struggles and has always struggled with the fact that I will not say sorry unless I am actually sorry. And there'll be times where my logical brain will be just literally going, Sarah, you need to apologize for what you've said or what you've done, because it has upset your spouse and he deserves an apology. But I literally cannot form the words. And now I'm realizing that that must be some element of a PDA profile on myself, where it's that kind of, actually, I need to say sorry, so I'm unable to say sorry. And the poor guy, I mean, he's been with me for 13 years, so he's long suffering with that.
What advice would you have, Sarah, for any parents listening at the beginning of their journey, so in a similar position to you?
Well, I don't know. Mainly because I'm the one that's still seeking all the advice. But I think that, you know, jokes aside, I think I'm a very true believer in mother or parent instinct. And I think that if you are a parent of a child, whether it's biologically yours or not, and you are parenting that child and you think that there is something that is worrying you, or that is not neurotypically developing on the pathway that society says that they need to be, that actually you have a right to question that. And I don't think that we should be forced by norms, social norms, to ignore that. You know, just going back to you saying about COVID, and I think that there'll be a plethora of parents and carers who have had children of that age group when they were, you know, not getting the social environments that we would have otherwise put them in, that will be using that to be in denial. Sounds really mean, but be in denial about maybe what they can see. And I think that we need to, I mean, this will be like tens of years down the line, but the dream would be that it doesn't matter, you know, that actually it's just one of those things that that child just develops differently at their own pace and needs a few different tools to get to an end result of adulthood. So that would be the dream. But going back to advice, I just think what I'm trying to say is, just don't let people's own cliches sit on you. You know, I had a lot of people who meant it with such genuine love, just be like, she's so small, she's so young, like, don't worry, you know, she can talk, so why are you stressed? All of those things, like, oh yeah, my kid jumps up and down when they're excited too. It's like, well, yeah, but for 4 hours straight, I don't know if that's okay. Like, you know, poor little legs. The other advice that I would do, and I don't know how people would create this, but I have had so much support from the SEND group, the Mum SEND group, just chucking questions in there. But I think what works really well for me is the fact that the children of the parents in that group are basically Florence's age or a little bit older. So actually it's still very new to the people that I'm talking to, because things change really rapidly. So what I've really loved is putting a question or a worry out there, and then having a reply being like, oh my God, we had this last Easter. Like, don't worry, this is what we did, or this is something that you might want to try. Because there are groups out there on Facebook in particular, is one I was thinking of. I'm in like all of the autistic toddler and preschooler groups there, but actually they can be incredibly overwhelming and quite negative as well.
Very negative, yeah. I found the same.
Yeah, you'll get like a beautiful post where it's like, hey, my non-verbal child said mummy today for the first time, and I'm like, oh, don't cry, Sarah. But it's, but actually the rest of it's all just, delays to EHCPs, not enough care, people in the wrong place to support, and not being able to afford or access support that they need. So yeah, and then the only other thing I would say is that I think that it's totally okay to have dual emotions about stuff. I think we're allowed to be totally obsessed and totally in love and besotted with our child, but also completely fearful for their future, terrified of what they're going to do later, and be completely heartbroken for the future we thought that they were going to have, because it's now an even more unknown. It's always an unknown, but if they do have additional needs, whatever that might mean, it's very scary. And I think that is something that we need to advise people, is that it's okay to feel both of those things at the same time, and be angry and sad, but you can still love your child unconditionally. The main thing, really. So it's okay to feel sadness around it. 100%.
And I totally agree. I think half the battle is having a group of people around you that just get it.
You can reach out to them with all those questions that people have in those Facebook groups, and realistically they're negative because people are asking questions when they're scared, when they're in their fearful moments. But what they don't have in those groups is the friendship element, that a group of parents going through the same thing can, yes, okay, you can reach out and you can ask those questions and you can be really raw and vulnerable, but also you can have a good laugh and you can laugh about some of the stuff that your children do, and that's okay too. And I think that's where the Facebook groups unfortunately can't offer that to people.
It's like those little wins. It's the same for when you have really good friends that have like neurotypical children. Their win might be, I don't know, that they can suddenly write their own name or whatever, but we're like, oh my god, yesterday our friends were here and Flo walked outside on wet ground for the first time all autumn winter, because as soon as it rains on the floor, she ain't walking outside. For whatever reason, she'll do it in bare feet, but if she's got shoes on, she won't. But yesterday we got 10 minutes of her walking outside, and then she realized, and then she took her shoes off and started to have a little bit of a meltdown, but we were able to curb it. So 2 positives: we curbed a meltdown and she walked outside. And Jules and I were like high-fiving each other. It's just like, yay. People don't get that. People won't be able
we did talk, because you forget to mention like the positives in these moments, but I love that in so many ways, that it's the little things that me and John will rejoice about with Alex, and that it would be tiny to people with neurotypical children, but for us it's massive. And it's so nice to celebrate those wins, because sometimes you've been waiting years for those wins.
If anyone ever asks me, or I'm forced to sort of reflect on a positive, like my 100% biggest positive out of everything has been the people that I've met, the relationships that I've formed with other people who are going through the same journey, who are just the best human beings, because life's kind of thrown them a curveball and they've been forced to look at themselves, look at what they're doing, look at the other people around them in just a different light. And that for me has been the best upshot of Max being autistic, I think. Sarah, it's been amazing, and you've so beautifully put some of the the journey that you've been through, and it's I know I can feel the emotion in your voice when you're talking about it. It's still so,
I am surprised I haven't cried.
It's still so new
well.
And but it's been beautiful speaking to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for sharing your story, because there'll be many people at the start of their journey and they'll be going through all the same things you're going through, and
they'll feel all the feels that you are.
So thank you so much for coming on, Sarah.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.